Okay, I'm in frame, I'm next to a microphone, I have notes, I have slides. Great, so welcome to my talk. It is called A Cyber-Phenomenological Inquiry into Art, Spirit, and Community in Text-Based Virtual Environments, or Neuromanticism.
You're also not on camera.
It's because I like to prance about. So, hi. We're here for Tilted-Town's 11th birthday, and as I alluded to in the opening remarks, the 11th is no one's favorite milestone and is everyone's least favorite Windows. I can't really use the 11th anniversary of the town to justify some kind of grandiose retrospective or emotional memoir. I'll look back over the years, kind of like I did last year. And so instead, this talk is really just a kind of purging of a bunch of thoughts that I've had recently. So these thoughts are around what exactly it is that we're doing when we show up in town to socialize, make art, feel feelings. And this talk isn't necessarily town specific, but it's describing kind of a mode of interacting with computers and each other on computers that could be applicable to any environment. But I happen to think that the town is a pretty exemplar, a pretty great example of what I'm getting at. Because after all, like, we should be investigating what motivates humans to jack into this giant thing that is often a corporate torment nexus. But as we've discussed ad nauseum, there are many faces to the torment nexus, and some of them are happy little spots like the town. So hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll agree with me that the town is, for the most part, a place that is very conducive to real and meaningful experiences. And like I said, a purge of thoughts. So I recently finished reading this book called My Tiny Life by Julian Dibble. So My Tiny Life is a memoir about the author's time spent in a piece of software called LambdaMoo. So LambdaMoo is a text-based virtual world that has been around since the early 90s. It's still running. I actually just applied for an account there. Haven't activated or used it yet. But back in the early 90s, this was kind of the hype train. Like, everyone was like, oh man, these fucking moos are gonna change the world. And there are all these startups and breathless news articles about MUDs and moos and all of these kinds of creative social environments on computers. There were also lots of like scary thought pieces about how these things represented addiction and a kind of like pathetic lifelessness, a kind of zombified existence where you're ignoring the real world to fuck about on a computer. So there was all this discourse raging, which all is now far away and kind of quaint and kind of funny. But at a 30-year remove, when I read this memoir and I think about moos and MUDs in this world a lot, there are so many similarities to life on a pubnik server. It's, you know, the ergonomics are different, but I think the mode of interaction and the kinds of things that occur are very similar. So, you know, this book from the mid-early 90s is actually very useful book for thinking about the town today. I will say that I've been told this book has a lot of like inaccuracies and embellishments. So, you know, read it with a grain of salt. But I bring it up today because there's a really interesting section towards the end. So the author wants to address these criticisms of being on MUDs all the time. So these are people logging on and chatting, possibly in excess of 40 hours a week. And so he quotes these imagined haters. Do these people in fact not have lives? Can anybody possibly invest such time and energy in such a place and not be in the throes of a miserable soul-wasting addiction? Ought there be a law or something against this stuff, lest the best years of our nation's youths be lost to building castles in the digital air? So that's kind of his summation of the criticism of this era, where people were really judging hard everyone typing away at their computers. So he himself has a rebuff to this, and he also quotes a researcher who I love dearly, and I highly recommend. This is Sherry Turkle. So Sherry Turkle is still active today. She's also very fashionable. So she's a researcher at MIT. And so throughout the 90s, she was thinking about identity online and what it is that people do when they go online. So she's conducted countless of studies and researched this stuff pretty exhaustively, and her books are super interesting. So hard recommend. So Dibble is kind of paraphrasing Turkle and himself. And one of the rebuffs to the criticism is, in many cases, online text-based virtual environments serve players as a kind of therapeutic environment, allowing them to come to grips with issues of identity and desire that might otherwise go on to hobble them in real life. I want to make an aside here to point out that back in the early 90s, MUDs and MOOs and all these virtual worlds were super fucking horny. People were just fucking all day. They had rooms, they had special role-playing software, like they had all this stuff. And looking back at it, like, it's not prudish. It's just like, I don't know, guys. Like, we don't really do that much anymore. Like, it's I don't know. I think that's culturally very fascinating. But anyway, I really like this quote, and I like this description of an online environment as potentially therapeutic. They also observe that intensive online periods are often transient in nature, coinciding with and easing periods of difficult adjustment in a user's life. So this reinforces the idea that an online community can serve as a kind of refuge when meet space is getting kind of rough. You can turn to these spaces that before network computers didn't really exist, right? We didn't have this option. If you were lucky, you might have had a community center or maybe a church or something where you could go and kind of process what's going on in real life. But until the advent of network computers, we've never had ready access to spaces like this, where we can sit with our thoughts and try on different identities and ways of being. So that's something really special. And I think recognizing that transient nature of, showing up to a community like Town is really important. So I'm kind of making this argument here, specifically that by virtue of our environment being text-based, instead of primarily sound or video or images, I actually think that really enhances the therapeutic nature of our environment. So just like Turkle writing about MUDs and MOOs in the 90s, there is something about a text-based environment that augments the therapeutic nature of an online space. So I want to argue this claim to you, and to do that, I've invented a horribly heavy-handed neologism, cyber-phenomenology. I'm going to stop and drink some water.
I'm applauding your decision to hydrate, not the end of your talk.
Okay, so phenomenology is the objective investigation of the subjective experience. You can kind of think of it as like a really hardcore sounding word that a bunch of old dudes in the 20th century invented because they wanted to think about feelings and they wanted to sound really cool and like scholarly while they were doing it. So by talking about this, I'm not saying that like I'm super into this discipline, but I think that at a high level, I am very, very invested in reflecting on my subjective experience. So I'm referring to the act of pondering what exactly it is that's going on inside my brain, my nervous system, my consciousness, and my imagination. Because all of those things are working together all the time. Like whether you like it or not, there is this engine inside of you that's constantly reacting to memories, to stimuli now, stimuli in the past. It's always going. And it's kind of going in parallel to your conscious self. And if you don't reckon with it, it could wreck you. So that's why I'm interested in phenomenology. But what makes it cyber? So cyber phenomenology is reflecting on the subjective experience, but when there's a computer in the loop. The computer, when we use a computer, becomes a part of our feedback loop. We are injecting it into the kind of stimulus and reaction to stimulus cycle. The computer is now in there. We're both receiving stimulus and we're outputting things into the world. And so it becomes this extension of our sense apparati. So cyber-phenomenology. It's, yeah, what's going on in here when I'm doing this, typing. So I think that any dedicated cybernaut should put time into thinking about this. When we hunch over our keyboards and our touchscreens, we're shooting stimuli directly into our nervous system. The stimuli generates emotional responses that cover the entirety of the human experience. Nothing that we do online is real, in the sense of Newtonian bodies slamming into each other. But in phenomenological terms, everything we do online is deadly serious. We've seen it for years. People driven to emotional extremes or even outright delusions from their online interactions. So when we engage in computing, we engage the Byzantine and beautiful emotional engines inside of us. When we engage in online computing, we're hooking those engines up to some other person's engines across the aether. It can lead to wonder, and it can lead to despair. So why text? Yeah, I touched on this last year, but I don't celebrate text-based interfaces for exclusively nostalgia reasons, although that's part of it, or because I think they're cool or look like the Matrix. That's also part of it. But I think about text-based interfaces because I think that when one considers human-computer interaction, there's this big spectrum of experience that's now available to us in the 21st century. So this is a half-joking and extremely oversimplified idea here. So this is a spectrum of online stimuli. So all the way on the left, we have text, we have audio. Moving to the right, we have little animated GIFs. I got a frantically dancing girl from the late 90s, 3D models, low-res smartphone videos, Call of Duty, and then all the way over on the right side, we've got like full-on 4K video. It's like shot right into your eyeballs. So, like I said, oversimplification. But I want you to imagine a scenario where you're being exposed to something traumatic, some traumatic content. I argue that when we're presented with a 4K video depicting something truly horrifying, we don't really have any time to react. Like, that's just going in there. That's going to shit up our nervous system right away. We're going to react to it, and that could haunt us for days, weeks, years. Look at the experience of like Facebook moderators. I mean, the shit that they have to go through is life-changing in a really horrible way. So while I think that text has the ability to move us in deep and powerful ways, it also allows us to consume stimuli in a slightly slower pace. It allows us to have a little bit more agency over what we engage with. And it engages our imagination in a different way. So I think that you can take this spectrum and imagine that to kind of engage with the stimuli, we have to bring an imagination. Now, when that 4K video starts, it's just pure image right into our brain. There's not really much left to the imagination. Like I said, you don't really have time to react to it. It's not a great way to like, reflect on your experience or process anything. But meanwhile, all the way on the left side, we just have text. And there, your imagination has to do almost all the work. It's, the words on the page really don't mean much until you read them and sit with them and imagine them in your mind. And this is something that I think is actually very powerful in the Dibble book, My Tiny Life. He has a great section on cybersex. And again, it might feel weird or funny from this remove, but he's talking about it in a very phenomenological way, where he's saying, like the imaginative power of this like sexy role play was just so overwhelming and powerful in a way that like he really treasures. And I think it's really a good object lesson in the role that imagination, the role that imagination plays. So, I think that text provides us with increasing returns as opposed to diminishing returns. The less fidelity, on our screens, the more our imagination has to work. The more our imagination has to work, the greater an experience's ability to heal and comfort us or to change us. So with that in mind, I want to take this line of thinking towards another topic that's been on my mind a lot, which is art. What is art? What makes an object in the world an art object versus some other kind of object? So I gave a talk about this in Florence earlier this month, and it was a kind of a small part of the talk, but it's like really stuck with me, and I'm still thinking about it, and I've been thinking about it in the context of the town. And I also just realized I kind of just want to talk about it with townies, because I think it's a very relevant topic. And part of my motivation is that over the years, I've heard people say things like this. I've been afraid to apply because I don't make enough art. I want to do something creative, but my ideas are stupid. I did a thing, but it's insignificant, or I'm embarrassed. I hear this a lot. There's like this imposter syndrome or inferiority complex around this idea of art. So I want to use my talk to kind of get down to first principles, like what the fuck is art? Like, should we be embarrassed by this thing that we made? So to help me think through what art is, I read a book called, well, I read part of a book called Aesthetic Theory. It's published in 1970, and it's by the German philosopher Theodor Adorno. I highly recommend Adorno. He doesn't quite write like other philosophers do. So for example, aesthetic theory is like, it's just a justified waterfall of text. There's no paragraph break, there's no chapter headings, like it just goes for pages and pages. And he writes in this kind of like ranting, almost theatrical style that I'm so delighted by. So check out Adorno.
Are there page numbers?
I didn't include page numbers, but I only read the first like 30 or 40 pages.
But like
so.
in the book, there are pages are numbered.
There have to be page numbers because of the way printing works, but yeah. So some of the quotes that really stuck with me. The first one is, art is defined by its relation to what it is not. So it means that we don't have this ready-made definition of like, that's art, that's not art. Like, art is this thing that we have to consider in comparison with the world around it. We have to look at it in context. And I'll give a very concrete example of that in the next slide, or a couple slides. Another quote that is about music, but I think you can extrapolate out to art in general, is, we don't understand music, it understands us. And when Adorno says this, he's not ascribing sentience to a piece of music or a piece of art. He's not saying that it's like there's some kind of spirit in there that's looking at humans and understands them. What he's saying is that there's something intrinsic to the shape of a song that when a human witnesses it, it matches something inside of us. It pattern matches something in our emotional engine, and we have a reaction to it. We're understood by that thing. And that thing might not even been made by another human. It could be birdsong. It could be the wind in the trees. As an example, I grew up very late in my family. Like, I was born 12 years after my oldest sibling, 9 years after my next oldest sibling. And I kind of showed up in a house that had been already lived in for 20 years. So I spent a lot of my childhood just like exploring and doing this kind of bizarre familial archaeology and finding objects that for my family were like these old stupid things they discarded, decades ago. But to me, they would be full of hidden meaning, and I would try to divine my family through these artifacts that I would find in the attic or in the basement. And one time I was in the basement and I found a music box, and I wound it up and I opened it, and I was probably 7-ish. And this little ballerina starts to go, and this little tiny sound comes out, this, music box style little guy. And I just started crying. It was just the saddest song I'd ever heard. And no one ever sat me down and was like, Nate, these are the sad songs. Like, these are the songs you cry to. I was like 7. Like, I hadn't listened to much music. I listened to like alternative rock radio. So there was something in the shape of that song that in me was recognized. And that's, I think, what Adorno was trying to say. He says that music understands us. The final quote is, the basic levels of experience that motivate art are related to those of the objective world from which they recoil. So I choose to interpret this as the way that in doing art, by spending our energy to make art, we're not spending our energy on things like survival material wealth, building something, paychecks, taxes, whatever. Like, we're choosing to spend our energy on this thing that is a lot more subjective in nature. So we're kind of withdrawing from this material world of practicality when we do art. I think that's very interesting. So, to drill down on that kind of first quote and distinguish what is an art object versus some other kind of object, an object becomes an art object based on context. It has to be observed and reacted to by a human at a point in time, and that observation has to lead to an emotional impression. And this idea of being a point in time is really important, because say that 5,000 years ago somebody made a piece of art, and then at a 5,000 year remove we pull it out of the ground and we're just like, the fuck is this? It's lost its meaning, it's lost its power. To us, maybe it's a chair or a table. Like, we just don't have any kind of connection to it. Or conversely, 5,000 years ago, maybe somebody made a tool that for them was this boring thing they used to, like, I don't know, skin deer or something. But to us, it's like, fuck, look at that inlay. Look at the shape of this thing. It's beautiful. So an object isn't always art. It becomes art based on human interaction in a moment in time. Going back to art being defined by what it isn't, an art object is allowed to be useless. We permit it to be useless. That's very different from, say, a tool like a hammer. Like, if I'm hammering away, bang, 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 and the head breaks off of the hammer and I just have a stick, like, I can keep plinking nails, but I would argue that that thing isn't really a hammer anymore. It's like, it's lost its thingness. It's just a stick now. So something has changed when we break a tool and it becomes useless. It ceases to be a tool, but art has no such, there's no such parameter for an art object. Like, it's allowed to be useless. We permit that. It might be a tool in addition to being art, but if we chose to never actually utilize it, it'd still be art. So, to really get concrete here, this is an object which is hopefully familiar to you, a painting by Van Gogh, but I argue that this is kindling, and that when we look at the constituent ingredients of this painting by Van Gogh, we see wood, we see canvas, we see oil. That's a torch. Take a stick and you wrap it in canvas and you dip it in oil and you light it on fire, and it's like, you got fire now. Like, it heats you, it illuminates, you can cook with it. It's super, super useful. But if we choose to leave this particular torch unburned, it could delight us. And as far as I know, nobody has burned this art yet. So this gets at how an art object, it might consist of the same material ingredients as other things in our world, but that delight is what is different about it, that reaction that we have. But we're a computer community, so I'm going to talk about computers. I got to college in 2006, and for primarily financial reasons, I decided to major in computer science. I love computers, but I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to do this and do that, but I also wanted to eat, so I studied computers. But I was deathly afraid of becoming IBM. Like, that was kind of my reference point for what it meant to do computers. Where I grew up, IBM was a big regional employer. I had family that worked there, and it's like, they wear suits, they go to a big gray cube. Like, it was just death incarnate to me. So early on in my college career, I said, I will mitigate the risk of becoming IBM by doing art. But I didn't really know what that meant. Because I went into college with this idea, this misconception, that computers and art were in tension with each other, that they were fighting each other, that these were somehow unrelated concepts. This isn't true, as we all know. And one of the ways that I learned my lesson about this misconception was a pretty amazing book called Computer Lib by Ted Nelson. So this is from 1975. I don't know how I found this. I think a professor nudged me towards it. So I'm going to read this quote out in full. Man has created the myth of the computer in their own image, or one of their images. Cold, immaculate, sterile, scientific, oppressive. Some people flee this image. Others, drawn towards it, have joined the cold, sterile, oppressive cult and propagate it like a faith. Many are still about this mischief, making people do things rigidly and saying it is the computer's fault. Still others see computers for what they really are, versatile gizmos which may be turned to any purpose in any style. And so a wealth of new styles and human purposes are being proposed and tried, each proponent propounding his own dream in his very personal way. This book presents a panoply of things and dreams. Perhaps some will appeal to the reader. Ted Nelson hangs out at the archive. He's 86 or 7 now, so I've actually gotten to hang out with him and chat with him, which is a huge honor for someone who has inspired me so much. But, you know, I found this and I was like, I got this shit all wrong. Like, computers and art go together like coffee and pie. So I wanted to show up donut.c. This is some code that I saw really early on in my life. That is C code in the shape of a donut. I believe it was submitted to the obfuscated C competition in the 2000s. And it's legal, C code, you can compile this. And if you run it, you get a 3D rotating ASCII donut in your terminal. And that's all it does. That's it. So, you know, I love this software. It has stuck with me forever. And it is very unlike other softwares. We expect this thing to compute. It does a bunch of math. It has no input really, but it has output. But we don't expect the same things of donut.c that we might expect from banking software or from a social network. So it's, like I said, it's allowed to be useless. It doesn't have to perform some useful task. It just delights us. And I think there's a whole other talk in this idea of how source code is kind of an art object unto itself, but then also execution, like, isn't that neat? You know, software is kind of magical in that way. So this is some code that I wrote probably in 2007 or late 2006. It's intentionally hideous Perl code that I wrote to generate flyers for my radio show. So it takes a string, a number of iterations, and it just recurs, randomly replacing one character at a time every time it iterates. The text in this example is, I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now. I am printing plain text, and I'm going to recur this operation until the text is destroyed, which is a reference to Alvin Lucier, and I highly recommend I Am Sitting in a Room by Alvin Lucier. So this is kind of baby Nate's like, whoa, dude, like, I'm not wearing a suit going to IBM, like, I'm wearing tie-dye and shit, I'm doing weird stuff, and I just thought it was a cute example to kind of dig up. I hopefully have done more impressive works since then.
That's pretty impressive.
Oh, are we muted? We're muted. Shit.
Would you like me to fix that?
No, I got it. I got to do it over here.
Oh, wait. Different laptop.
So there's a kind of art, a very, very broad category of art called found art. And so found art is about keeping your eyes open as you move through the world and seeing what kinds of things out there you have an emotional reaction to, and then calling attention to it and saying like, shit, I just found this beautiful thing out in the wilds of the world. So to motivate this, I have a video of the Free Jazz Escalator in Oakland, California. It is the 12th Street BART station. It's one of the entrances down a shitty little alleyway covered in construction materials and filth. And it's just the way that it screeches really hit me. I just kind of stood here in this alleyway for a long time. And it's like the way that it's approaching tonality, but not quite getting there. It's approaching a melody, but not quite getting there. There's something about this escalator that to me feels striving and beautiful. And nobody went and tuned this escalator to like do this. This is just something random out there in the world. So that's kind of found art in a nutshell. And I've always been really fixated on that. Obviously, if you know me, my muse for many years has been plain text. I love cutting things up and shuffling things around. And when I think back to like why that might be, I grew up in a very rural area, so I did a lot of wandering in woods that weren't mine, but I found infinite beauty in them anyway. The wispy breath of deer sipping from the melted edge of a frozen pond in the dead of winter, A wildflower craning its stem up through rusted junk that some neighbor dumped in the woods. The all-enveloping pungency of swamp cabbage struck with the wind, smooth limb broken off a dead tree. These were all experiences that I just stumbled upon, and it was like I had this huge art gallery behind my house. These experiences really greased up my brain tubes and inspired me over and over. So when my life became primarily digitally oriented, I think that I have long sought out the kind of chaotic beauty that my youthful forests provided. So I mentioned my youthful misconception about computers possibly being agents of the cold and the sterile, but these machines and the networked web they've woven are bursting with the kinds of inspiration that nature has given humans since the very origin of our species. You just look for it. So I've tentatively named this mode in which I find myself, in which I often see townies. This hunt for the emotional and the beautiful in the great neon grid of cyberspace. This insistence on the importance of subjectivity as we write stories to each other all day in chat. I have dubbed it Neuromanticism. And I made some GIFs about it because it was fun. So it's a rather clumsy neologism, worse than cyber-phenomenology. And if you think about the roots in here a little, it really falls apart. But it makes me happy, so I'm going to go with it. So my neuromantics, let's kind of take all of this back. Thinking phenomenologically, this idea of finding the chaos in what might otherwise be a cold and logical environment. And let's bring it back to the town. So I want to make another bold statement. There's been a few. But I argue that every single thing that we do on the town, whether that's a statement on IRC, whether that's a tiny, humble little web page, whether it's some text file buried deep in a file hierarchy that we think no one will ever find, every little action like that, that's an artistic expression. Everything that we type out is an attempt to serialize something in us in some kind of container that we hope can be properly parsed by another human being. Our creative works can just be moments in time. They don't need to be planned, they don't need to be grandiose, and they don't even necessarily need to be crafted. You could just find them, like a chunk in dev random that says but. That's great. Tell me about that if it happens. The important thing is that whatever we're putting out is an honest, if even just approximated reflection of what is inside of our emotional engines. Because when we're on town, we engage our imagination at every step. We're practicing the vulnerability of letting others into our imagination. And as long as we remain open-minded, compassionate, and excellent to each other, I believe this will contribute to keeping ours a healing refuge, just like all those muds back in the 90s. So there's a lead that I've buried in this talk, and I have, it's time to exhume the lead that I've buried. The world around us is terrifying. Every new headline feels like a wound. It is a time of danger, uncertainty, and devastation. Even as I speak right now, there are protests all around this country playing out in an attempt to beat back some of our daily nightmare. And I'm not there. I'm here, and I'm talking about computers and feelings and art. But I'm totally at peace with that. Because even if these circumstances are different than circumstances 30 years ago, I think that Sherry Turkle is still correct about the therapeutic and healing nature of online play and text-based virtual environments. I believe that we are in more need than ever for spaces where our imagination can feel unbounded, even while the world outside seems intent on boxing us in. Thank you. How'd I do?